So a little while ago I did a video on the Ferrari 310, Ferrari's first ever V10 powered Formula 1 car which they brought in for 1996 and was quite the prickly customer for Schumacher in his first season with the Scuderia. But despite this, Schumacher ended up winning 3 races with it. However, these were races that Williams dropped the ball at. While Schumacher was able to get the Ferrari into a position where he could take advantage of some dropped balls from the lads at Grove, the win at Barcelona came through hill fluff in the start and both Williams cars running drier weather setups for some unknown reason. Schumacher, meanwhile, in a car that through its design ended up being solid in the wet, went on to make everybody else look like amateurs as he went on to set laps in the region of 3 to 4 seconds a lap faster than everybody else was setting as they tried to keep it on the track. At Spa, Williams completely cacked the bed with pit stop strategy and that allowed Michael to get into a prime position to win there. And in Italy, in front of the Tifosi, Hill retired after hitting the tyre stacks and Villeneuve damaged his floor cutting one of the chicanes. While Ferrari had won 3 races, they were coming at the expense of Williams fluffing it. Put Schumacher in that FW18 and it probably ends up like Verstappen in 2023. So for 1997, Ferrari was hoping that they would have a car that would be able to win races on merit instead of waiting for the faster cars to have a mare of a Grand Prix that they could then just pick up the pieces from. Could they do that with the 310B? Well, it almost did. And Ferrari was given a boost all round for 1997. Not only had they learned quite a bit through 1996, they also had for 1997 take advantage of 3 key bits of personnel change. Rory Byrne and Ross Brawn had joined Ferrari from Benetton, but crucially Adrian Newey had left Williams for McLaren and wasn't going to be at McLaren properly until 1998. While Newey had designed the FW19 that Williams would be running, he wasn't around to do any upgrades to it. Sounds a bit like the 2024 season, only that it was Red Bull that had to figure it out without Newey instead. Barnard, though, would leave Ferrari just before the midpoint of 1997, but Byrne and Brawn were at least a replacement. Williams' car was going to be in the hands of Gavin Fisher, who, like Pierre Vache today, was basically a pupil of Newey. And while Williams had made subtle changes to the FW19 to kind of improve it a tiny bit over the previous FW18, Ferrari had gone all in with a replacement for the 310. Even though it was called the 310B, the 1996 and 1997 cars could not have been any more different. So, while we're here, let's just have a bit of a reminder as to how the original 310B looked. It's not that far removed from the 1995 Ferrari in a way, with the lower style nose cone, the last F1 car to run with this sort of arrangement as everybody had gone towards the high nose style from 1996 onwards, with those noses then starting to gradually get lower over the next few years. By around 2001, 2002, 2003, there had been recommendations made to the FIA through safety and technical delegate Charlie Whiting because of certain safety concerns raised, no pun intended, through having these, well, raised noses. The danger was that these raised noses would catch on the side pods of another car in a side-on accident and then catch air and potentially strike the head of a driver. That's why they started drooping around the turn of the century, but I digress. Anyway, Ferrari in 1996 had this boxy, chunky brick. Yeah, brick works. Ferrari had also not noticed that there was a hole in the regulations regarding how high the cockpit sides could be, and these were made mandatory for 1996 after Sauber had done their own version of this through 1994 and 1995. So Ferrari had much larger cockpit sides compared to most, if not all, the other teams. I think McLaren and also Benetton had quite high cockpit sides in 1996, but that's just me recalling it from my memory. But either way, the Ferrari looked like somebody had just run it through Photoshop and not had the image scale properly when blowing it up. It was certainly an odd looking car. But Ferrari rocked up to the Australian Grand Prix and pre-season testing before that with a car that looked completely different from what was there before. It was much better sculpted, with Barnard managing to put the car through quite the intensive cosmetic surgery procedure. The nose was trimmed down and had gone somewhat similar to what Williams was using, although it was kind of like a Williams meets McLaren arrangement. While Williams went for a blunted, more rounded nose, Ferrari had squared theirs off slightly to a point, but it was raised in a similar way to the Williams whilst looking like the McLarens, if you follow me. Further back, the cockpit surround had been lowered and the bodywork on the engine cover around the airbox was completely smoothed off. As you can see here with the 310, it's almost like the high cockpit sides were part of the overall bodywork. Now, they're not. They're completely smoothed off and like already mentioned, the car is much cleaner all round. Despite keeping the 310 moniker, the cars don't look the same at all. New side pods, new nose cone, new cockpit surrounds, new engine cover, new front wing, new rear wing, and the deletion of those aero deflectors in front of the rear wheels. And there was also a general tidy up of the bodywork behind the front wing as well, going for a single keel design back there. 3-litre V10 as per the previous year, around 600 kilos all in including driver and fluids, and also a 7-speed gearbox, which was quite the novelty at the time because most teams were sticking with 6. So how did it get on for the first couple of rounds of 1997 then? Well, but then not so well. At Melbourne, Villeneuve put on one of those qualifying performances, dumping 1.7 seconds on his own teammate and then putting 2.1 on Schumacher, with Irvine 2.5 off the pole time. Like I've said so many times on this channel by now, that qualifying session was so mad, Pedro Diniz needed to be given special dispensation to race because Villeneuve had pulled something out of the bag. But Schumacher ended up having the last laugh. In the race, Eddie Irvine tagged Michael's 1995 teammate Johnny Herbert, who in turn took Villeneuve out at the first corner, and the Michael would then finish the race second behind David Coulthard, after having to pit late on in the race for an unscheduled stop. McLaren would end up being a dark horse, it seemed, in the early stages of the season. It was a very odd situation because everybody had been Villeneuve versus Schumacher, Villeneuve versus Schumacher, Villeneuve versus Schumacher, Williams versus Ferrari, only for David Coulthard to leave Australia with all 10 points. The second round was in Brazil. For newer viewers of F1, that probably does seem weird, but some of us are old enough to remember Sao Paulo being the second or even the first round of the season. Villeneuve still had the upper hand, putting almost 6/10 on the Ferrari in the 1-hour session on Saturday afternoon, only for the French-Canadian singer-songwriter to be once again in the gravel at the first corner. It's hard to see what happened given grainy YouTube footage and nowhere near the angles we have today, but it looks like Michael got up the inside, started moving JV out a little bit, only for JV to get a little bit of a tank slapper on the dirt and then go off into the gravel. Nothing malicious on Michael's end, just one of those first corner things, but the race was then red flagged, so Villeneuve got another go. Schumacher took the lead at turn 1 again, but at least this time Villeneuve didn't end up in the gravel, although JV managed to get the lead back at the end of the lap. He crossed the line 0.001 of a second in front of the Michael. The thing is, the Ferrari had been all over the place, handling-wise that is, all weekend. There was something just not quite right with it, and Michael had spoken to the media that the Ferrari was tricky to get into the right handling window. I'm guessing that it was a bit like the Mercedes cars from a few years back. Get them in the right setup window, and they're unbeatable. Get them out of it, and they're divas. Schumacher, dealing with these handling issues, watched as the blue and white Williams pulled away while he, in turn, was starting to be harassed by Gerhard Berger's Benetton. Schumacher was able to keep the Austrian behind for a bit, so it looked like it would be Benetton versus Ferrari during the pit stop cycles. Benetton would indeed get Berger out ahead, and Berger was then able to start to have a go at Villeneuve because Villeneuve's brakes were acting up. As the race went on, it was evident that the tyres on the Ferrari faded and the handling was going to get worse. Schumacher would slip back even further, being overtaken by Häkkönen's McLaren and Panis's Prost to finish in 5th place, while Villeneuve took the victory. Häkkönen, Schumacher and Alesi, who rounded out the points in that Grand Prix, ended up finishing nose to tail. Alesi could have had Schumacher and Häkkönen, but Häkkönen and Schumacher were just able to hold on. The Goodyears were getting absolutely shredded during that Grand Prix. So moving on to Argentina, and the Williams cars were once again the class of the field, with Olivier Panis the surprise package in 3rd. Although, when you remember that the Bridgestones were the better tyre to have in hot and or high degradation scenarios, it kind of makes sense. This being because Bridgestone's softs were equal to Goodyear's hards in terms of, well, hardness. Only the best technical descriptions on this channel. But either way, Schumacher was off the pace. Benetton and McLaren had decided to run the harder tyre all weekend. The way it worked back then is that you declared which compound it was you were going to run, and then you ran it for the whole weekend. Softer tyres were faster, but hards were more durable, and with fuel being added in, it made for some interesting strategies. But Schumacher over a second off pole on softer Goodyear rubber wasn't what Ferrari would have wanted. But because of the tyre war, the times in 1997 were knocking the 1996 lap times out of the park. It didn't help that there was a lap 1 melee. Irvine managed to swoop around the outside of Schumacher while Schumacher battled with Panis, only for Michael to then tag Barrichello, and that was both of them out of the Grand Prix. So Schumacher was going to be scoring no points. But he did get offered a lifeline. One of the marshals was waving a red flag instead of a yellow flag as the safety car came out, and there would also be white flags to show that there was a slow car on track. Because of that red flag being waved incorrectly, Schumacher sprinted back to the pit lane to grab the spare car, just in case the race was stopped. It wasn't stopped. After no scoring in Buenos Aires, Schumacher would be back to point scoring ways at San Marino. He was now back up to second place in the standings, having been down in 5th prior to the start of that race because of the topsy-turvy nature of the season. In the opening 3 races, 11 different drivers had scored points, which is amazing when you consider only the top 6 scored back then. The next race of the season would be Schumacher's happy hunting ground of Monaco. And it was a washout. Back then there wasn't the weather forecasting they have now, so the teams had to gamble on how they were setting up the car. Williams, much like they had done at Barcelona the previous year, decided to go for a more dry setup, thinking any rain showers would be brief or later in the race. Ferrari went with a full wet setup, much like they had done at Barcelona the previous year, and it absolutely hammered down. I remember watching this live on ITV and seeing just how bloody awful the conditions were. They wouldn't run in that today. They just wouldn't. And Schumacher repeated what he had done in Barcelona to destroy the field and take his first victory of the season. And in the process, Schumacher moved into the lead of the 1997 standings thanks to Villeneuve no scoring at Imola and Monaco, with Irvine in 3rd. But around this point it was kind of clear that 1997 was going to be one of those seasons. Williams was missing Newey while Ferrari had managed to make some progress. Reliability was definitely better, with Michael and Eddie's only retirements of the year so far being collision related. Ferrari had also improved the front end of the car by around the Canadian Grand Prix, which Michael won from pole, and he did the same thing at Manicourt, which helped the championship lead out massively. After the French Grand Prix, Michael was now the favourite for the title. He had a 14-point lead in the standings and had been the first driver so far to win 2 races back-to-back. He would retire from the British Grand Prix with a wheel bearing problem before following that with a 2nd place at home in Germany. The Hungarian Grand Prix was an outlier. As in Brazil, Schumacher suffered badly with tyre degradation, which was still something that even with upgrades, Ferrari was still suffering with. Although, in their defence, the weather was hot at the same time, which really did not help, and Damon Hill almost took an unlikely victory. I know I say this every time I mention this specific race, but if you had said at the start of the 1997 season that an Arrows would be on course to win a race at some point over the course of the year, you'd have been laughed at. And Irvine, much like in 1996, had borne the brunt of the retirements. At Canada, Silverstone and Hockenheim, he'd retired. Canada was another collision, his half shaft went at Silverstone, and then another collision at Hockenheim. He was then out but classified at Hungary and Belgium, with the latter race being another Schumacher wet weather masterclass. But I want to save that one for a future date because number one, it was the first Grand Prix ever to start behind a safety car, and there was also a little bit of controversy surrounding the tyres. But we'll cross those bridges when we get to it. Also at the same time, Ferrari was using a slightly different car, one that was lighter and had a bigger fuel tank. Again, something we'll sort when we get to that video, if you follow me. But things seemed to teeter off a tiny bit after that. After Schumacher's wet weather masterclass at Belgium, much like it had been at Monaco, he was then 6th at Monza, 6th again at the A1 ring, which is now the Red Bull ring, and then retired from the Luxembourg Grand Prix. The chaos of the Japanese Grand Prix, which received its own dedicated video a couple of months ago, 3 months ago, allowed things to then be set up for the finale at Jerez, which has also had its own dedicated video. While Williams seemed to be doing their best to lose it, Ferrari was seemingly trying to lose it as well. At the time, the F1 media was saying how the hell did the Romans build an empire because the Italian Grand Prix was a total shower at an organisational level and at a Ferrari level, because the Ferraris for that race could only muster 9th and 10th in qualifying. Was it lack of power? Too much drag? I can't actually find out why they were so slow in that race and how they managed to bungle it so badly at the race where people were there just to see them. If anybody knows why the Ferraris were so bad at Monza that year, please do leave it in the comments, because I kind of want to learn a little bit more. But Schumacher's 6th place at the A1 ring was because he'd overtaken Frentzen under yellow flags and got a 10-second stop-go penalty for it, so he kind of bungled that one by himself. But it did seem to be that over the course of the latter part of 1997, there was a trend being set. The Ferrari was on an upward trend, while the Williams had kind of stagnated and was beginning to drop off, and it would drop off completely by the start of 1998 when Renault pulled out. McLaren meanwhile were proving that they too were quick, but the reliability wasn't there. They'd won 2 Grand Prix over the course of 1997, both with Coulthard at Australia and also at Monza. The Ferrari in Schumacher's hands was pretty damn quick, but there were still some issues they had to iron out if they were going to be champions. Tyre degradation in hot conditions was just one problem they had to solve, and in 1998 they'd be one of the few Goodyear teams left on the grid, because Goodyear by this point had said they were saying goodbye to Formula 1 after the conclusion of the 1998 season, and most of the grid for 1998 would be on Bridgestones the following year, including McLaren. Eddie's bad result at Monza, it has to be said, coincided with him using this lighter, bigger fuel tank car, so I don't know what was going on there, although at the A1 ring he was wiped out by Jean Alesi in quite a scary accident. But when the season ended, Ferrari was definitely onto something. Their 1997 car had been a marked improvement, and with Byrne and Brawn having more input for 1998, there would definitely be space to improve even further. 1997 ended with the 5 wins versus the 3 scored by Schumacher the previous year, and the car retired just twice all year as the result of mechanical failures, that being when both cars retired at Silverstone, with all the other retirements being collision related, one of those being quite severe in terms of the championship, and Ferrari ended up with 32 more points on the board. There was actually a 3rd mechanical retirement that year. That was when Irvine's engine blew up at the Luxembourg Grand Prix at the Nurburgring. That also being the race where Schumacher sort of lost the championship. He got wiped out by his own brother. 10 retirements in 1997 spread across the 2 drivers. The previous year, Irvine had suffered 10 just by himself, and it was 15 in total for the entirety of 1996. But I'd like to know if anybody has any more info besides the obvious about Irvine's season post-Germany. There's quite a little bit of a barren patch there, but he's still got a fair few podiums that year, way more than the 1 that he scored over 1996. Hungary, we established the problems with the tyres. Belgium, I'll cover in a dedicated video, and then Monza being horrendous for both cars. Austria, as we already mentioned, he was wiped out by Alesi in that scary crash. And he was using the lighter car for Monza, but I don't know. He was also using that lighter car for Austria. But the 310B. It's a tricky car to describe because there are so many occasions throughout 1997 where it seemed that neither Schumacher, Ferrari, Williams nor Villeneuve wanted to win that championship. Remember the piece of pub trivia. Villeneuve and Michael did not share the podium all year through 1997. That's how mad the season was. Williams probably dropped it harder than Ferrari did, and you'd think that Williams should have won it as easily as they did in 1996 and 1992, but the 310 served as a wake-up call for the rest of the grid. If Ferrari could get the car to work better in 1998, ironing out the tyre degradation problems and getting some more power, then there's every chance that Michael could take a 3rd World Championship, and beyond. It just depended on what the other teams could come up with in 1998. Teams like, I don't know, McLaren, who now had Adrian Newey, and Newey would have way more input on the 1998 McLaren than he ever did on the 1997 McLaren. Have I actually done the MP413? I don't think I have. I know I've done the brake pedal, but I don't think I've actually done the car, so I might have to look at that and how Hakkinen and Schumacher shaped up over the course of the year, because the MP413, like the FW18, is one of my favourite cars from that time period. So if I haven't, then that's definitely one to look at. But was the 310 as good as the Williams, or did it surpass the Williams at any point? And the MP412 as well? Which of those 3 cars was the best car come the end of the season? Have a debate about it down in the comments. So then, a look at the 1997 season Ferrari had with the 310B, as they tried to do better than they had done through 1996. If this has been an interesting look through the history books, then do like the video so I know a good job was done. And for more from the channel, get subscribed and get the bell on, that is if you haven't already, so you never miss out on anything else I do around here. Massive thanks as ever go out to the rad lads over at Patreon that support me at a more personal level, and if you want to help keep the lights on around here, then there is a link to Patreon in the description, along with links to affiliates, Discord, socials and other bits and pieces you might want or need to know. There's super thanks down there as well if you just want to buy me a Christmas beer or Christmas coffee, and memberships for Patreon without the Patreon. So until next time, I've been Millward, have yourselves a decent Christmas, and I'll be back soon with something else to talk about. So until that next time, goodbye.